Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 78 for January 5th, 2018. Hey everyone, Danny Rubino here, joined with Zach Bowden for another Windows Central podcast, the first of 2018. Happy New Year to everybody. We are recovering here in the Northeast from the snowpocalypse of this year. The nice bomb, whatever they call it. I forgot what it was. But yeah, it's very cold here. Zach, how are you doing with this new year? Are you recovering?
I'm not too bad. So far, so good. It's only been a few days, though. How are you?
Hanging in there, getting ready for CES. The Consumer Electronics Show starts next week in Las Vegas. I'll be out there with Mark Quim and a couple other people from the Mobile Nations site. So if you're interested in Android, and well, Apple won't have much there. Microsoft is not going to be there either, although they will be. They are there in an unofficial thing. They'll have a little event that I'll be going to on Wednesday. But there are OEM partners there from Dell and HP and all them. We expect to hear some stuff. Specifically, Dell is usually pretty big at this show, and they have a lot of stuff. And Razer will be there, and I know Razer always does really cool stuff at CES. If you remember last year, I believe it was, yeah, they announced this. Well, they showed that project they're working on, that laptop with 3 displays that folded out.
I got stolen.
That got stolen eventually.
Wow.
Yeah, that was at CES. And so they're very cool on doing some big stuff, and I have a feeling they'll be doing something else this year, so make sure you pay attention to that. So that should be fun. But let's dive into this. This week we'll be talking about, well, we're going to briefly talk about the Intel CPU security issue and the new vulnerabilities that were found this week and what that means. Now, you know, disclaimer here, I am not a CPU architecture expert here, and it's a very complicated matter, so we're just going to kind of gloss over some of it. I think it's not that it's blown out of proportion, but the way some people are responding, you know, it was just kind of funny. I had people saying, like, my Bluetooth driver isn't working anymore. It's just because I have a virus from this Intel thing. It's like, oh my God, so much wrong with that statement. But we'll briefly go through that. We'll also talk about my editorial about a controversial topic, which is, of course, Microsoft's pivoting and their cutting of certain product lines and features, including some stuff that happened this week with Cortana, and why I think that is, and some interesting patterns going on there and what it sort of means going forward. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some of that CES stuff. Not a whole lot happening this week as the New Year's kicks off. It was a kind of almost like a half week, you know how that stuff works with New Year's. But we'll see what we can do. All right, let's dive into it. Also, no new builds apparently, right, Zach?
What's the status they were like, oh, well, maybe. And then they were like, no. Turns out this half week's just not worth it. Besides, the build that they would have released would have been no different from the one that they released before Christmas, because they haven't really had time to work on anything since the holidays.
I was running it on my Surface laptop, one of them, and I really enjoy the new look of everything. Of course,
the acrylic
fluent design, the acrylic going everywhere, and the fluent design. Edge, you know, this is we could talk about Edge a little bit too as we talk about the security stuff. But like, you know, Edge to me, this is always the problem, right? With Edge is also being co-developed with the OS, and there's connecting parts between them, and Edge becomes a little bit unstable. That's to be expected, of course, but that's also a frustrating part if you actually use Edge like I do. And so I've had some issues there, but yeah, I'll be looking forward to that update. So, okay, let's talk about the security stuff. I even forgot the names of them. Do you remember? Spectre and
Meltdown and
Meltdown.
Spectre. Meltdown only affects the Intel ones, whereas Spectre affects AMD and ARM-based ones as well, I believe.
Correct. Yeah. So Meltdown is Intel, goes back many years. It's a flaw, they say, with the way all these processors are designed. It has to do with memory and the way the way it does it is what makes them kind of fast. And now this fix gets rid of how it was doing this memory stuff, I guess. And now we're expecting up to, and this is what's getting all the headlines, up to 30% reduction in performance, which is, again, blown out of proportion because it's very specific to tasks, not across the board. So it's not like when you're launching a computer, it's 30% now slower. What it actually means is your processor is just doing more work than it had to before because it doesn't have this virtualization stuff or to do with the memory. And that can vary. It could go all the way down from like 2% to, in a worst case scenario, 30 for a specific task. I think they've seen more effect of this on Amazon's AWS servers than what Microsoft and Windows has seen so far. And some sites have already done some very preliminary gaming benchmarks on Linux systems and found no difference. I don't think if you game on a PC, you're going to be like, before I was getting 82 frames per second, now I'm getting 56. It's not that. It may be 82 frames per second. Now I'm getting 81 or 80 or 83. This stuff is very fluid. And Intel was very clear, and we're kind of taking their word at it. So a patch came out. Microsoft patched it through Windows updates that came out. Some Surface devices also got an ancillary firmware update through the UEFI. I'm not sure what's different between those things. And some of that went out to the release preview. So if you didn't get that yet, it's because it looks like they're just doing some final testing, making sure it's all right before it goes out to non-insider surfaces. But yeah, there's a lot going on here. Intel was a little cagey, and this stuff came out a week early, apparently. It was supposed to be all kind of announced next week, which is weird because of CES. And everybody, all these companies had been aware of all this stuff and been working on patching it. They didn't want to go public with it because it's a security vulnerability. So if you go out there and be like, hey, these processors have a hole in them, and then, people can exploit them. And so in order to avoid that, they all kind of kept it a secret so they could patch the systems. And then they were going to disclose it and then be like, but it's fine because we patch it also, so it should be cool. Now, the master, what was it called?
Meltdown.
I always say, okay. Yeah, Meltdown apparently is basically attenuated with these updates. It's not perfect, but there's not much concern. Edge has also got some tweaks going on with it, apparently, that will help mitigate any stuff going forward. Intel says going forward, this is only improving it better, and they'll kind of engineer around it. But it goes to show you, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, were saying, blaming Intel for this, and it is obviously their fault, but at the same time, these are sort of repercussions that you don't necessarily anticipate. And I feel uncomfortable criticizing microarchitecture of processors since I'm not an engineer. So yeah. I don't know. It seems to be these things that, and then there's the other one too, Spectre, which affects ARM, it affects Apple's processors, affects everything, was a common thing that I don't know. That one apparently is the worst one because it's harder to fix. But it's also harder to exploit, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, according to some security researchers, the Meltdown and Spectre exploit critical vulnerabilities in the modern processors. These hardware bugs allow programs to steal data which is currently processed on the computer. While programs are typically not permitted to read data from other programs, a malicious program can exploit Meltdown and Spectre to get hold of secrets stored in the memory of other running programs. This might include your passwords stored in a password manager or browser, your personal photos, emails, instant messages, and even business critical documents. So it does sound pretty serious when you put it like that. But again, these patches, some of the patches so far come out I've seen them described as temporary fixes. I don't know if Intel's ones are more permanent, but doing updates will help you stay protected from these exploits. You may see some minor performance decreases here and there, but I don't think that 30% number is a big number, and I don't think many people will see that in general use. It's workflow dependent, so if you're just doing normal things, you're not really going to see any performance issues at all.
It seems to be for people who do a lot of database and big file transfers and things like that, not running a UWP.
Don't get me wrong, that does suck, the fact that may be slower on your device, but I assume Intel, AMD and ARM manufacturers will learn from this, and so in their future CPUs fix this.
And now what came out too, which was interesting, was because this was known and companies were working on it. Apparently these updates went out to insiders early.
Yes, it was in build 17063. I don't think it was in the blog post that they mentioned it, but it was at least some pre-release version of that patch was in that build. It might have been even in the build before that, but they were testing it with insiders before this came out to be a thing.
And so, and that's what I find funny, because all this concern about performance. It's like, if there's one thing people do on the internet, it's complain. And like, I don't recall anyone going, wow, why is this build feel so slow? Why am I having everything's running slower? And you think of it, if it was severe enough, and that was something obvious, people would have jumped all over it and been like complaining about it. And we didn't hear a peep. Like I didn't hear anyone say anything about performance. Maybe I missed it, but I definitely don't recall hearing that.
Remember how every time there was a minor patch to Windows, the comments section would be, seems faster. Now, in this case,
right.
Seems slower.
It seems slower.
Seems slower today. It does suck, but I mean, again, I assume future processors from Intel and everyone will usually hopefully fix this. I don't know how they're going to go about their next products and whatnot.
Right, and that's really, and again, the way they design processors, it's not like designing the laptops. Like this isn't like, oh, we'll fix it in 2019. Like processors have like a ramp up time of like 5 years of design and implementation and manufacturing. And so this isn't something you just like, oh, we'll just, fix this in the next version, the Intel 9th generation. Like they may be able to do that, but engineering chips is very difficult to do. So yeah, it's a complicated problem. This is as we move to a world where everything is connected and everything runs a processor, and no one's immune from this, right? So Apple came out and said, finally, it was a day later, that all our stuff too. And this is interesting because Apple makes their own chips. They're based off the same sort of architecture, but they do their own, and they all have the same vulnerability. So it's not like, you would think, well, if this is just strictly Intel, and if Apple had done it, and AMD had the flaw too, and they were cagey about it. Everybody was like, no one really wanted to take blame.
When this first came out, news was everywhere. It was all like misunderstood. Like AMD was like, this doesn't affect us at all,
right?
And Intel was like, but it affects everyone. But then it turns out that kind of was true, kind of not true, in the sense that there's two specific exploits that they're talking about, not just one. So it was a bit of a mess at first. I remember seeing on Twitter everybody going, oh my god, this is like the worst thing in the world. All the PCs are going to be really slow now, and I don't really care about these exploits. I'm just going to install the patches. People who are way smarter than me are going to deal with this problem, and I'm just going to have to press install on an update. And
that's honestly really what it comes down to. It's sort of like that's all we can do, right?
Yeah.
What the important thing to know is there is no virus out there right now that's known or has been identified, and there's no reason to believe is out there exploiting this right now. And so I think that was, as the way this news came out, that's some people got that impression. People who aren't versed in technology, like I said, someone was like, my laptop is not functioning properly today. I might Bluetooth this and that, and then is this because of that? And it's just like, oh my, no, no, you're just having standard laptop issues. So don't look at your PC at having any problems as necessarily related to this. Now, having said that, there were some very interesting release notes with Microsoft's patch, including it may fail to install or get stuck. I believe it was at 99% and not complete, and you have to go in and do like some manual typing in of commands to make it stick. Oh yeah, go read the release notes. Now I haven't heard of a lot of people having this failure, but it goes to show you that this patch was probably pushed out with standards normally below what Microsoft would push out to the regular consumer, but due to the important need of it. Now, Intel, I believe, said that up to 90% of computers are already now patched for this, or will be patched by next week. So I don't know. This is it's hard to decide if you should be outraged or just be like, okay, this is just another thing. It's not quite. I don't want to say not quite. It's not even close to the ransomware stuff that happened in 2017, or whole computers where people are locked out of them in hospitals. It's not that, but security. We're going into an era where humans have no experience in, right? We're building this tech world as we go, and that reminds me, it's a really good. If you follow internet, the people, the movers and shakers, there seems to be this shift now from the people who sort of created the internet, who created Facebook and all these systems that we use, are now starting to have regrets, or at least starting to say that what we thought was going to be an awesome thing, this free everything, just information, everybody can have access, it's turning out not to be quite as good. And I don't want to get into the whole meme wars and fake news and all this, but we're clearly moving into an era where the internet, we're starting to get some really negative stuff by having a world that's all connected. And it goes to show you that, humans are human, and how we build this technology is not going to always work, which is why, by the way, someone mentioned Black Mirror in comments, which started season 4 this week, ironically. That's why that show resonates so much, is when we watch it, we're like, oh yeah, I could see that happening. Yeah, it's a scary time.
Also, real quick, I've seen a few people asking what kind of Intel processor are affected. According to the researchers, every Intel processor which implements out-of-order execution is potentially effective, which is effectively every processor since 1995, except Intel Itanium and Intel Atom before 2013. So, a lot of them. If you've got an Intel processor, assume you're affected.
Yeah, so just stick to Windows updates and... use security, biometrics where you can. That's all you can really ask. That's the problem here. So the issue here is it's got access to the kernel level of the operating system. Kernels are, that core of the OS is always cut off from the rest of the OS. Like there's very special access to that. And this breached it. It's sort of like the blood-brain barrier, if you can understand that concept when you take drugs and like how things shouldn't cross that. This is doing that, and that's why it's so... potentially detrimental, especially with phones. Now, I think phones are interesting just because Android was always the king of, all the security stuff. But we've never, for all the crap people gave Android over the years, it was never this like real widespread, issue with viruses on Android. The potential was always there, but it never got bad. And I would always say the chances of it are so minimal. Not so minimal, but it's less now. But I imagine at some point in the future, just the way all this technology works, there will be a catastrophic thing happening. So
yeah, do we know if Windows 10 mobile devices are getting an update that patch against this?
We don't. In theory, the processors there are definitely potentially affected. Obviously, this goes to the target. If you're going to write a virus, you're going to write anything that's going to target Windows 10 mobile. This is one of the reasons, by the way, like Macs don't get viruses. No one writes held them up. Yeah, it's because if you're going to write a virus, like why put all that work into write something that's going to affect so little people when you just hit the PC market, which is like 90%. So, so there's you have safety in that. What was that? Safety by obscurity. Security through obscurity. Yeah. So. All right, let's move on to my editorial this week. So. I don't know, I'm curious about your thought about this. You, me, and Jez, this is what kind of spurned it. We had a conversation offline about Microsoft and products, and part of it was spurned by Jez's, I would say, misunderstanding, and it's not, I'm not throwing Jez under the bus here, because I think what Jez represents, honestly, is actually the average person, the regular consumer, what everybody else sees when they look at Microsoft and technology, versus us who just live and breathe this every day, and we follow every trend, and we've known what's happened in the last 15, 20 years at the company. And so I want to talk about, like, with all the stuff that's been canceled and cut back on, and whether it's Zune, it's Groove, it's Windows Phone, there's probably 5 other things that's been cut back. A lot of people get this idea that, Microsoft's retreating from the consumer space. They're going to turn to IBM. And I see the problem a little bit differently. This is how I see it. I see Microsoft had a very good run in the 90s, got a little crazy in the 2000s, and is now recovering and shifting gears from that. A lot of people like Ballmer, and he has an enthusiasm. You can't question his loyalty to the company or his desire to see the company succeed, but we can definitely take issue with some of the decisions made and the company he inherited and what he didn't change about it. And he flat out says that he thinks mobile was the biggest mistake of his tenure there, that it was something he missed and didn't give necessary attention to. And I would absolutely say that too. To me, that was the most obvious thing. But they saw in the 2000s, Windows as the OS as being their bread and butter. This thing was going to be around forever. There was no reason to believe that PCs were going to diminish. And, like we said, PCs are still valuable today. We just have more screens to divide our attention. They didn't, see that happening. Now, I think I saw that happening when I first got my Dell Axum. I was like, this is literally, it said Pocket PC. I was like, oh my God, this is the future right here. We're going to have like little computers in our hands. Now I was so disappointed when I couldn't run like actual Windows apps on it. And that's where that started getting into the myth versus reality kind of thing. But I saw this potential. And it always blew my mind that Microsoft, they were doing stuff around it, but it always felt like there was a group that was tasked with making this, and they were like a side project. Meanwhile, Windows got all the attention, all the resources, and that's the way Microsoft operated. There's that famous diagram, right, with all the different departments in Microsoft, and they're all like trying to shoot each other. And because that's how Microsoft used to operate. You used to have these siloed departments. They all competed for the same resources. Whoever told the best story got those resources, and the ones who didn't got their projects cut. And so instead of working under a unified vision as a company, they were all out for themselves as departments. And you saw this under Sinofsky with Windows. Mobile was sidelined. They were left out of the Windows discussion. Meanwhile, they were lifting a lot from mobile in terms of UI and everything like that, but there was no focus there for that kind of stuff. And so the question is, and everybody blames Nadella for like killing Windows Phone, and technically it's under his watch, but if you're Nadella and you take over the company in like 2014 going to 2015, and you have inherited just a really dysfunctional product line, and I throw Microsoft Band in this too, and I love Band, but Band never fit in with Windows. It was a side project. It grew out of Xbox, and there was a group working on it, but it wasn't part of Surface, wasn't part of Windows Phone. It was its own little thing. Like, if you inherited that, you can either try to force and make these things work in the market, even though there's no chance it's going to have long-term success, or you do the hard thing and you start killing stuff off and you try to start with a clean slate and you go, okay, the only products we're going to make going forward are going to fit into our Windows ecosystem specifically. They're going to have a very specific mission, a specific goal. We have specific expectations of how they're going to succeed. And we're going to put all our effort behind them when they launch. But people know this. Like when the Band came out, I still will never forget this. I was at dinner because that thing launched literally 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on a weeknight. No fanfare, no press briefings. A few major sites had like info on it. And that was it. It was just like, oh, who launches a product in the middle of the night? 10 o'clock at night? That was the weirdest thing. And you can't tell me that, like, that is a good start to a new product line. Like, and this is always the issue with these products that they started off with. They were always like, oh, here's this thing. And they plop it, and maybe we'll advertise it, maybe we won't, right? And that's not how, everybody knew this. That's not how you do a product. The biggest thing I always heard about Band was they need to advertise it. Why can't I go buy one? Why are they always short supplies? Why is it not in my country? Why does the company not talk about it? Like, that's all legit. Like, that is 100% correct. And so is that how a company should be doing products? No, I don't think so. And I think that's what they're doing now. They're cutting back on all this stuff. You look at Surface. People tell me, like, and I hate this rumor about, like, they're going to cut Surface. They have 5 products now. They have Surface Laptop, Surface Pro, Surface Book, Surface Hub, Surface Studio. And now we're expecting possibly a 6th product line this year. Like that, they're not cutting Surface. Like that is accelerating. You would think if Surface was like a pet project of theirs, didn't have support of the company, we would just today have Surface Pro still. That would be it. There'd be no other devices out there. Instead, we have 4 others and potentially 5 coming. And so I find that very different. I find Xbox very different. People still under this impression, oh, Microsoft's going to cut Xbox next. It's like Xbox has been around for 17 years. They just promoted the head of the Xbox to a leadership position in the company, which is only held, they're basically equivalent now with Windows. And they have a lot more influence in the direction of the company and product lines and all this kind of stuff. That's not the kind of move you make if you're relegating gaming to the side. That says we're bringing gaming deeper into Microsoft. We consider this a core feature of what we do. So I think we need to make a distinction between those product lines versus the old Ballmer era stuff. And I think what they're saying is we're going to have fewer but stronger product lines versus many weak ones. And there were many weak product lines. And everybody listening to this who are fans of Microsoft's product knows this because we heard it all the time from you for the last 5 years. Like, this is no way to do a product. And I don't know. I think that is all changing. And it just means if you invested in Microsoft, you're bitter and, lost money, and you're 100% to feel that way. Like, there's no reason. When people tell me, like, I don't trust Microsoft anymore, I can't tell them they're wrong. It's true. I mean, maybe Microsoft needs to prove to you when you back, and that is their goal.
I mean, and if we look at it, ever since Satya Nadella took office, he has, all the products released under him have been relatively successful. I mean, the new Surface Pros, the Surface Book, the Surface Hub, and the Surface Studio, and all that, they've all done well. Xbox One S and Xbox One X, they've been hardware releases that have also done well. So it definitely feels like what Satya has been doing is sort of cutting out all the stuff that old Microsoft, the decisions old Microsoft made, and has started implementing new ideas, new changes, and new thought processes on how they want to release products and build products for markets and consumers in the future. And it's I feel a necessary change in pathing, but it makes sense because, as you say, the products they were releasing before were all different, and most of them were very weak. Windows Phone 7 launch was like, oh yeah, Windows Phone 7. They did do a marketing campaign for Windows Phone 7, and I think they did one for Windows Phone 8, but it slowly trailed off. And in 2014, I think its market share had started to decline at that point. It was at its highest in 2013, and after that, it slowly started to decline. And funnily enough, in 2014, that's when Satya Nadella took over. And since then, I think he could see that there's no point fighting in this market because we're already too far behind anyway. So it's time to step back from this. Let's rethink what we want to do in the mobile space and try again. And this is what this rumored Andromeda device is supposed to be. Again, with the wearable, I would be surprised if Microsoft never ventured back into wearables again.
Right.
I assume that at some point they will come back into that. I mean, they kept all the services for it, that they did say that, we're not shutting this down, we're keeping this, and the band experiment is just over. So I assume that they will return to wearables at some point when they're ready to, and when they have a product that they can get behind entirely as one company. And I think it's just a stronger message. If the entirety of the company is behind a product they release, then it just makes sense. If it ties into other things, because let's remember when the band was released, it was its standalone product. It didn't even run Windows. It was its own thing.
Right.
That didn't have any real connections to any other platform. It had an app that you synced it with, but that was really it. Imagine if they released one today, I imagine it would have all kinds of capabilities, like how you can do certain things on it that make sense on your devices. Maybe you can walk up to a device and it has you log in because it knows it's you and stuff. Just smaller integrations like that, which would make sense. And I realize other devices can already do that. But if it's Microsoft's, there's likely going to be some kind of play where it complements other devices that Microsoft or OEMs make. And the band wasn't that. The band was its own thing that just did health. And it was a good device, don't get me wrong. The band was, I arguably think, is what was the best fitness band you could buy at the time. But it didn't fit with the rest of Microsoft.
Yeah, and you bring up 3 points I want to talk about. One, the band. Let's get to that. Like, the band was weirder. It ran custom firmware. And they always said from day one, as people were pointing out, that it was a demonstration platform for its sensors and basically Microsoft Health. That's a weird thing. Like, I get it, and I always try to stress that, which is, like, I wrote an article on the original Windows band, why it was hard to find. And I explained that this isn't really like a full product launch for them. This is them putting something out in the market, kind of getting feedback, and, and that's a weird thing to do, I think. It definitely sent a mixed message to people who bought into it. And that's not the kind of, I think, thing you want to sell people necessarily. And so there's that issue. There is the issue with what was its future? What was the long-term goal of this thing? Because if it doesn't run Windows, like I said, it ran a custom firmware that looked like Windows. Obviously, it had the tiles. It had some tie-ins. But, like, what was the goal of that? In 5 years, eventually you want to have that run some form of Windows, you would think, if possible, like Windows IoT, which is, kind of meant for devices like that. But IoT is still, it's getting there now, but it was still heavy in 2015 and stuff like that. Like, you couldn't put it on a wearable. The battery life
do you
would
remember
allow it.
that Track Store wearable?
Right.
That ran Windows IoT, but it was like this chunky thing.
Sure, right, exactly. And so, like, I think that's obviously we'll get there. There's no reason to think that like that technology just won't evolve, but it just wasn't there at band. So what I'm saying is like in 2 or 3 years, they would have to do like a Windows Phone thing where they'd have to reboot it and like it would be
Yeah.
a different experience and different UI or different. It would be like a very different thing because it didn't fit at all into what they were doing with Windows, and you'd have to do its own side development. It would have to have its own dedicated team who that's all they did and had no interaction with the rest of Windows, which is what they've been trying to get away from for the longest time. And so that wasn't visible to the consumer, of course, but that was the reality of it, and it just was a strange product. Now you brought up the point, which was it was really good and arguably one of the best devices on the market at the time. And that's the other problem here was we all ran the band and kind of liked it, right? They didn't launch products that were like dumpster fires. No one got the band. This thing is terrible, and like all the reviews were 1 star, right? That wasn't the issue. The issue was like this thing is pretty cool. It's not perfect, but we see the potential here, right? And there was like that's what makes this stuff so hard. Was like Microsoft kind of knows what they're doing, but it just wasn't fully like baked. And that's something Apple, I would say, never does, right? Apple's launches, when they do stuff, they're very few. They don't launch a lot of product categories. When they do it, they go all in and they're like, this thing is perfect. You can't say that's how the band launched. Windows Phone goes back even further. And again, I say when people go, oh, Nadella killed phone. He had no idea what to do. Listen, Windows Phone's problems go back to day one. If you look at what Microsoft, how they launch new categories now, they're like, listen, we're going to do a new category. We do it first. We're going to put devices out there, and we're going to demonstrate really what this is supposed to be like and set the precedent for it. And Ballmer even says they should have done their own phone back in the day. Instead, with Windows Phone, they left it up to their OEM partners. And they did a pretty good job, but still, you put your new line into the hands of these companies who may not be as invested and all that kind of stuff. Not to mention Microsoft doesn't make their own device, so they don't know the problems that these companies are necessarily facing. In other words, if you take today's Microsoft and you go back to 2006 and say we're going to do a phone, would they do it the same way? Would they be like, all right, here, Samsung, HP, right, you can just go and do your own phone. Here's the OS. No, they would be like, we're going to make our own phone first, and we'll give it to our partners, and they would take the lead on it. And that's the difference between today's Microsoft versus yesterday. So I would say Windows Phone from day one, between the support, and it was already, by the time Windows Phone, as we know it, Windows Phone 7 came out, it was already almost 3 years behind iOS. Like, that is not insignificant. Like that should not have been the case, right? But it was.
See, thinking about going back in time and assuming Microsoft did things differently, if they were to have released the phone in 2006, today would be very different because it may have taken off, right. Sure, it may have beaten out the iPhone, but if that was the case, Windows today would be in a very different position. It would still be two separate, whereas Microsoft right now in real life are trying to merge their platforms as one universal OS and app platform. If Windows Mobile succeeded in 2006, we would still have a separate platform for phones and a separate platform for desktop because there was no way that there would be, desktop apps running on those phones in 2006. So Microsoft would have had to have done its own mobile platform, which is kind of what they did with Windows Phone 7 anyway. And then today we wouldn't have this unified OS. Microsoft's one Windows wouldn't be here today. It would be an entirely different Microsoft. So perhaps maybe it was a good idea, a good thing that Microsoft bailed out on phones.
Apple faces this problem with iOS, and
right.
iOS what's cool about iOS was it was built for the mobile world, which is why it's so good. Mm-hmm. It was built for the modern age. Windows Phone 7 even was still based on .NET and the Windows CE kernel, which was already, I believe, 15 years old at the time, maybe 20. It was built really on older stuff and older technologies. That's why they rebooted Windows Phone 7 to Windows Phone 8, was because there was a wall they were hitting with Phone 7. They couldn't upgrade and do newer technologies because it was built on, the foundation itself was built on was already old. Now you could be like, well, they shouldn't have done that in the first place, but they didn't port the new kernel, the Windows NT kernel, over to mobile. Like, you don't do that overnight. So they had a lot of moving parts going on. But it's true. I mean, now Apple, as for all their success, 60% of their revenue is estimated just from the iPhone sales. They're basically when you describe Apple in 2018, you can be like, oh, Apple, they make phones. They're a phone company. Like, that's what they do. They occasionally make laptops. They occasionally make headphones. But their main business is making phones, smartphones.
Right. I mean, Apple has the same problem backwards if you think about it. They have a really strong mobile play and a relatively weak desktop play. Their Macs don't sell as well as their iPhones do. I think Mac market share is like 5% still. It's been 5% for forever.
Yeah. Yeah, and so now they're trying to figure out how they can take iOS, leverage the strength there to make their desktop platform stronger. That's what these rumors are about their merging of their app development system. And it's a similar problem. Their iPad sales are going down or not doing well because the phones have gotten so big that it's cannibalized those sales. So they're not in a perfect position either with this stuff. But the problem with Apple is they're locked to iOS now, and they can't do any dramatic changes to it because there's millions and millions of people using it. So you're beholden to the OS and your customer base, right? And so there's problems with this stuff. But I don't know. I just see... Listen, if they cancel Surface and Xbox in the next 3 years, I'll eat my hat. I'll be like, okay, I was completely wrong about everything I just said. But I really do feel like the product lines coming out now, which are much few and far between, do have the full support of the company and are much more focused than the stuff that came in the Ballmer era. And I think that's going to be a big differentiating change. And it's unfortunate, if you bought onto the stuff, but Microsoft kind of was stretching themselves far in between with all these devices and categories and stuff like that, and never doing it good enough to make an argument to keep it going. So I don't know. And speaking of, this week, now this was a weird thing. So Cortana has had music ID abilities for a while. I believe it goes back to 2015 or even 2014. And you can hit a little music note and it would ID the song, and then it would take you to Groove to buy it or listen to it. With the deprecation of Groove as a music service now, they got rid of the music ID stuff. And we don't really know the logic completely behind this because now I can make a strong case that there's really no phones out there anymore. I know there's some of you, but for the most of the world, it's not a significant portion. So are people using music ID on the desktop and laptops?
No.
Probably not. Yeah, Zach and I have seen numbers of what people do just on their start menus. If you look at those numbers, I can't imagine people are really using Music ID. Plus, it wasn't a feature that was like you had to know that, that little note in the corner. It wasn't like obvious in your face kind of thing. Having said that, it seems like the feature was there. It existed. Like, can't they just keep it going? Part of the problem, I think, was so they ID'd the song. Now what's the next step?
Right.
Like, do they go, they can't stream it for you. Do they direct you to
a Bing
Google's
search.
YouTube, Amazon Music Store, iTunes? I guess I could do Spotify. But you're basically then serving everything to your competition. And so that's sort of I think part of the problem too.
I think I know the technical reason, and this is me more guessing than anything, but thinking about it, the Groove service was based on Zune servers. Groove is Zune in disguise. It was, when it started, the Zune marketplace, and that's where Microsoft put all its music where people could buy it. Then obviously they switched that to Xbox Live Music, which eventually had a subscription, and that subscription module was what Groove was. And Microsoft built the music IDing service into its Zune servers, so when you ID'd a song, you could see it in Xbox Music or Cortana or Groove when Cortana was around. And when they shut down Groove, they essentially shut down the server. That's like, well, we don't need this anymore. We can use this server for something else. And as such, when Cortana tries to look for the music now, there's no server for it to look for. It's like, well, I'm looking, but the server's empty or gone or not on anymore. So what do I do? That's why it says the service has been retired. That's what I'm assuming has happened. Otherwise, I feel like, they could keep the Cortana recognition going. But then again, I imagine they would also have to have the server where all the music has been ID'd, so it can listen. The
database.
Yeah, and then they're just redirected to Bing or something. I don't know what they do. But that's still a lot of data for just IDing music. It doesn't really make sense to have an IDing feature if you don't have something to stream it from.
And we have to understand, like, companies like Shazam, who, now was bought out by Apple, and SoundHound, like, that was their whole business model. Like, that's all they did was work on these algorithms and then work on the database and serving it up and giving you, like, that's not a It's not a project you work on for 3 months and then you just put the product out there and it's just like, all right, we're done. Like, it's a constant thing you need to be, updating and maintaining. And I'm not sure what's the value there. I get, like, as a consumer, you're like, I just liked having it. And that should be reason enough. But as a company for Microsoft, you're just throwing money into this and you're like, okay, but we're not getting anything from it. The technology still exists within Microsoft. Obviously, the Music ID, that's the way it worked. But they would have to, I would imagine, have rebuilt the entire database to redirect to things like either Spotify. And I couldn't imagine what's going on there. Have you ever tried to merge two Excel documents? It's like, imagine doing that with music database. Like, that's not something you go like, hey, Bill, we're taking Groove offline. Can you just fix it all so it just goes to like Spotify instead? Like,
I imagine you'd even have to get permission from Spotify, because I don't think they have their database public, right? You'd have to talk to them and get their team to build APIs so that Microsoft could tap into them. And I imagine it'd be a whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would think they would have to repurpose or take a lot of people within the company and just put them on this project for months at a time. I don't know. These are, I get the problem I have with it, of course, is this ongoing feeling that Cortana for consumers feels like it's getting less features as we go on. Like, I don't feel like Cortana in 2017 was way better than my Cortana experience in 2016.
Yeah, Cortana has stalled, it feels.
Yes, and I don't like saying that, but that's how it feels. Like, the way Cortana came out the gates with Windows Phone 8.1, like, I was like, I mean, everybody was kind of like, hey, this thing is pretty cool. Like, Microsoft seems to have a pretty good advantage here. Or, it was, now they're still behind Google at the time, but it quickly felt like it was catching up to them and Siri and everything. And now I just feel like a lot of that's gone. And we can get to this bigger issue of Cortana, which is, again, phones serve as a vector for services. And so that's why music services, AI, voice services, that's where Google and Apple have advantage with phones. With Microsoft not having a phone out there, you don't get Cortana into a lot of hands. And it, raises the question of, like, who do you use Cortana? Like, at CES next week, I expect to hear LG's TVs are going to have Google Voice in it. You're going to hear a lot more Alexa devices from third-party companies coming out. You're going to be hearing smart mirrors and stuff with Google Voice and Google. Like, you're going to start to see all that stuff put into more consumer products. Now, we can have a discussion about whether those are good products or necessary. But the point, of course, is that is someplace where Microsoft is not even close, right? There's not going to be, I guarantee, I will not be talking about Cortana being in a smart mirror probably next week. I probably won't be talking about Cortana launching on the new Samsung TVs. That story won't be written, and that's a problem. That's a big problem, because Google is going to get, and Amazon too, are going to get their voice services onto a lot more of these devices, and they all tie together, and I don't know. I don't know how Cortana competes with that. Like, how?
And I also worry that it's too late, similar to the phone
Yes.
problem that Microsoft had. Alexa and Google are way ahead in this market now. Even Apple technically aren't in this home speaker market yet.
Right.
Siri's crap. I mean, no one likes Siri,
Yes.
really. So Microsoft and Apple do have an uphill battle here. Microsoft more so, which seems to be always the case when it comes to Microsoft. Microsoft is battling everyone here.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, Apple, it's like, well, we have Siri on 80 million smartphones,
exactly.
and you can't. It's the default thing. You can't even change it. So they'll lock in there. Plus, it's on their laptops now with a dedicated button. So it's like they're still in a better position, even if it's not as good. Like, they can always make their product that's in millions of hands better. I'm not sure what Microsoft does here. I'm really, I would love to be a fly on the wall at these meetings to figure out what their plan is for Cortana. Now, people say, like, well, maybe they'll just cut Cortana, but that kind of misunderstands what Cortana is. Cortana really is just a sophisticated front end for Bing, and it also taps into Microsoft's AI work, which is separate from Cortana. What you're seeing a lot of is Cortana leveraging Microsoft AI, but it's not driving necessarily Microsoft AI, or at least it does kind of in a feedback loop, but not directly. So it doesn't really make sense to cut Cortana because they kind of get it for free. It's sort of like Bing is what drives Cortana. So that's why if you don't have Cortana in your country, it's probably because your Bing experience is also non-existent or
Yeah.
terrible.
I mean, I know in 2018 Microsoft are going to try and reposition Cortana on the desktop. They're going to pull it out from the search function because a lot of people weren't
Right.
pleased when Windows 10 came around and Cortana was search. No, not many people like that, not many normal people. So I assume it will be this year. Microsoft are going to pull Cortana out of the search bar on the taskbar. They're going to put it in its own dedicated area and return search to just search, which means I assume Microsoft are going to have to start focusing more on the virtual assistant side of things. Because Microsoft could have, I mean, I don't know if they have been doing this, but since Cortana was built into search, Microsoft technically could say, oh yeah, anybody who searches for something on their PC is using Cortana, therefore our numbers are high
Right.
and all that stuff, which is kind of dishonest. But now if it is being separated, as I have heard it may be, it's going to put Cortana in its own box where it has to shine on its own now. It's no longer, an
point.
assistant to search. It needs to have something that people want to go there for, whether it's, asking questions or, I really don't know how Microsoft can position Cortana as its own like virtual assistant thing.
Yeah, and this all just gets to the bigger issue of like how these things fit into our lives. Like, I know everybody talks about Alexa, how awesome it is. I have an Amazon Alexa. Actually, I unplugged it and it's at the office on the floor. I just don't use these products, and it's not like, so when people rag on Harman Kardon and Vogue, which I think is actually an excellent device. To me, when I was testing them and I had them side by side, they felt the same for me what I used them for, which is mostly playing music. What's the weather? Is Home Depot open right now? Like when I use it for those things, they felt exactly the same. Now I know people would talk about all the Alexa skills. The skills to me were still weird though, because you have to kind of remember what the service is and like say it, and like there's still this idea of like you have to say things in a certain way. The artificial intelligence is not smart enough to figure out, what I mean without specific commands. It's getting there, but it's not quite there. And I know, yep.
See, these are the disadvantages to Satya's sort of plan here, where it's like pulling back on some of these things and focusing in other areas. It's that it makes Microsoft right now at least look sloppy. Like some things
Right.
look like for the Windows 10 launch and up until Resident 4 even, the design was all over the place. Like apps, it was as if people who work on the inbox apps of Windows 10 weren't talking to each other. Some apps looked completely different from others. If you remember, the initial Windows 10 launch had different context menu designs for each modern app. That's ridiculous. What kind of... Imagine turning on a Mac or an iPhone and then, holding an icon was different to this other icon because it was from a different developer. That would be crazy. But that's what Windows 10 was when it first launched. While Satya is, trying to reposition the company, it does mean that in this transition period, Microsoft looks sloppy, and with the Fluent Design stuff at least coming to design, it looks better now. But with regards to features, Cortana now has a button that doesn't do anything. Music search, what's that about? There's physically a button that now doesn't do anything. So it does look messy and as if Microsoft doesn't know what they're doing. But I would be surprised if they really didn't know what they were doing. I think it just takes time for all of this, for the transition to take place.
Yeah. They definitely still have a lot of work to do, but it's we're starting to see those changes. Like let's talk about like Windows Mixed Reality. Like I think Windows Mixed Reality. Now I get a lot of people are gonna be like, I don't use it. I don't have a interest in using it. But like you can't deny the fact that this idea of mixed and augmented reality is a fad. Like everybody knows it's going to work. It's going to take time to get there until we get that killer app and the killer hardware. Like it's just like smartphones were. I mean, go back to 2006 when I had a Trio, this big bricky thing that I had to have a clicking belt mechanism to carry it because it couldn't fit in your pocket. Like, and people were like, that's never going to catch on. Just email when you get home. But it wasn't true. It was just we needed Apple basically come along and go like, here's how these things should look and work, And the same thing with mixed and augmented reality. I think most people see that, which is why there's always been interest in it since Lawnmower Man came out, 25 years ago. But the way Windows Mixed Reality came out, like I don't feel like, and I'd be curious if others disagree with this, I don't feel like Microsoft like half-assed this. I don't feel like there was just a couple people working on it. It feels like a really complete system. Like when you go into the Cliff's house, like it's a pretty complete experience. It's pretty impressive, all the stuff that just works on day one with the store and all the UWP apps and the games and how clever the things are with like even little things like you can see your controllers. Not only can you see them and see the batteries on them, but you can see their shadows on the ground. Like it just feel, and you do that, and then you bring in Steam VR, which launched in the preview, right away. It wasn't like they didn't launch it and like in 6 months, sometime 2018, we'll bring Steam VR. They're like, oh no, it'll be out like next week, and you'll be able to sign up. And we already saw the numbers this week. They're already 4% on Steam VR. It's like 4.4%, which isn't a tremendous amount, but you're competing against Vive and Oculus Rift, which have been on the market for 2 years now, and we're already starting to see Windows mixed reality. And to put that into context, that's a doubling from just a few weeks before. They were at 2%, now they're at 4%.
And I think that's because this market is still in its infant years. It's not too late for Microsoft in this market, whereas it is for phones and possibly Cortana and the voice assistants. In VR, it's still very early, so it's anybody's game at this point. I mean, even Apple are rumored to be, maybe not VR, maybe they're doing more AR, but the VR market right now it's anyone's game here.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about this before with Windows Mixed Reality. The idea is like, it's a whole operating system. Everything about it is building it for that world in 10 years where we do have holograms and no screens and things are virtual and all this. Like they've already built that foundation. They built the app ecosystem around it and the tools for it. So they don't have to go, oh, this new world is here. Now we have to redo Windows. We'll do Windows VR. Like they're not going to they're like, oh, we did that back in, 2017. And I just feel like it's pretty, I don't know, when I use it, like I tweeted about this, the movie experience. I think it's called Big Screen. They showed Top Gun in 3D. And I should talk about this because it's a free app, and I don't know how it works. I got to go back into it, but you go into this virtual movie theater lobby, and you can look, and Top Gun was playing, and you look down the hallway, and it's just like you're in a movie theater. You see the show times, the next one that starts. And then you pick the one you want to go to. And when you look at the sign, it was a little weird for the user interaction, but you look at the sign and a little countdown clock would start. It was 10 seconds. And if it went down to 0, it would jump you into the theater. And it puts you into a seat. And then you have like a little controller that would pop up. And you can then pick your seat if you want to change it and all this. But you were in a movie theater with other people. We all have avatars. And I was like sitting next to someone. I could just look over and they would be looking at me and they would have their name above their head. And it was really surreal. I was like, oh my God, it's like they were actually putting like real people into this theater, and there were lights on the walls, and you had a giant 60-foot movie screen, and there were trailers. I was watching movie previews, and then the lights go down and the movie started, and I watched Top Gun in 3D. It was pretty weird. Now, would I be like, oh, this was better than my 4K LG TV? I go, no, of course not. This is one of those technologies, but when I was watching it, I was like, this could be pretty awesome in like 2 or 3 years, where like you watch virtual movies with your friends. Like you just go, yeah, let's all meet up, and we all pop into the lobby, and you're going to sit next to them in a virtual theater and watch this stuff. Like it really changes. Now, it's, like I said, it's not perfect, but you can see how this stuff is going to be kind of big, and Microsoft's already there. It already works. You can do it now, and it's, I don't know. With my Surface Book 2, I can just take it to any room, plug in this headset, and I'm good to go. Like I'll be taking it with me to CES, just because I can show it off to people and stuff. But like, I don't know. It's neat stuff.
I think when it comes to VR, the winner will be the person who can sell their headset for the cheapest. Because when the HTC Vive and the Oculus launched, they were both $600, $700 head devices, and that's a lot of money for a consumer to lay down on a product that, at the time when they first launched, really wasn't understood by many people. So what's this do? Why do I stick it on my head for? That's weird. But now it's like Microsoft has given OEMs and itself the tools to build VR headsets that are way cheaper. Like the HP headset is $300 maybe, $400, can't remember, which is way cheaper than what the HTC and Oculus were when they first launched. Now the Oculus has also come down in price since then. I'm not sure about the HTC one. Yep. But OEMs can make cheaper Windows Mixed Reality ones, and since Windows Mixed Reality is Windows and is also able to tap into the Steam VR stuff, gamers who use Steam can, instead of looking at Oculus and the HTC Vive, if they don't have the money for those, they can buy a Windows Mixed Reality headset and still experience Steam, which is what a lot of people, I imagine, will be doing, which is why this this number in Steam saying 4% for Windows Mixed Reality has gone up, because people are seeing these Mixed Reality headsets and going, oh, I can use this to play not only Windows stuff, and I can also do my Steam stuff on it, so I'm just going to get that one because it's cheaper. People like to save money, and I feel in this market, in the VR market especially, it's a race to the bottom when it comes to price.
Yeah, like I said, it's pretty impressive that if you just have Windows 10, you have this system built into it. It's just there. It's sitting there in the background. You just need to plug in a headset. Now, there are definitely obstacles. You mentioned price. I think that's a big one. And it works both ways, just like the PC market. Like, you want to go cheaper, but you also want to go baller and go higher. Like, one of the problems with these headsets, it's the resolution. It's not bad, but compared to like if you had a 4K 60-inch display, it's not going to be the same. That will change. There will be higher resolution devices coming out, and as the technology evolves, that too will get better and sharper, and everything. The field of view will get better. Like, those are obstacles. The idea that it needs to be, solved with wires versus wireless and cables, all that needs to be fixed too. So there's definitely kind of a lot going on there. But it's early. But I like it. I feel, like I said, this to me feels like the new Microsoft. This feels like, oh no, we're committed to this. We're in this for a long haul. Yeah, we're building this whole platform.
I struggle to see the correlation between Windows Mixed Reality and Enterprise. I mean, to be fair, there will be advances and benefits for Enterprise as well, but the Windows Mixed Reality effort does feel very consumery at this point, at least, which is exciting. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, consumers, Microsoft are dead. I don't think that's true. I think they're just repositioning and trying out new markets. I mean, consumers are consumers, but there are many different kinds of consumers, and I would bet that there are kinds of consumers that don't have a product out there that they would like right now. And I think that's what Microsoft's trying to do now. They're trying to tap into these markets that don't exist yet, where they think consumers may exist and people may want those products. So I think it's going to be very exciting, and a very, very exciting next few years at least.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, I think that about does it for this week.
Do you want to do the CES stuff?
Oh, yeah. I mean, CES, pay attention next week. We'll be there. We got a lot of embargo stuff coming out, of course. A lot of it's going around PC. Don't expect any phones. Microsoft's not going to announce Andromeda there, so there'll be no big Windows announcements or anything like that. I think there'll be some side announcements possibly from Microsoft. There is some movement going on. I'm already hearing things. But there's definitely a lot of exciting stuff going to be at CES, so we'll be there covering that. So make sure you pay attention. I know there's some cool things coming down the PC lines, so it should be fun. I'll have a blast in Vegas, hopefully, as well. But let me know about, you guys leave me comments and tell me what you think. I understand if you're a customer and you invest in all this stuff, you have no faith in Microsoft. It's totally legit, but like I said, they're still committed to consumer. They're just going to be a finer point versus broadswords, and I think it's probably the smart move. But there you go. Thanks for listening. We're going to take questions now for the next 20 minutes or so on mixer.com/Windows Central. I can't talk anymore. Mixer.com/Windows Central, where we record this live every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure you join in for that. Other than that, you can follow me on Twitter at Daniel_Rubino, RUB as in boy, INO, and Zach at ZACBOWDEN. And we appreciate all of you for chiming in. Let us know how we can make it better. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.